She found him on her doorstep. No note, no name, just a newborn with eyes that had already given up. For 8 years, she raised him on food stamps and prayer, hiding him from a world that didn't want him. Then one evening, a midnight black Maybach stopped at her rusted gate. A billionaire stepped out, not to donate, not to thank her. He was there because the child she'd never let go of was the sole heir to a fortune someone would kill to keep buried. The boy she raised had no legal identity. No birth certificate, 8 years hidden, surviving on scraps. The man in the Maybach knew the truth. Marcus was the secret son of a dead billionaire, the sole heir to a fortune worth killing for, and he wasn't there to deliver a check. He was there to close a loose end. Clara Mee Johnson was 62 years old when she became a mother for the second time, not by choice, by crisis. On a cold February morning in 2015, she opened her front door to find a cardboard box on her porch. Inside, wrapped in a soiled towel, was a newborn, hours old. Umbilical cord still attached, clumsily cut. No note, no name, just a baby boy with a clenched fist and a weak cry that sounded like a question nobody had answered. She should have called the authorities. That's what a sane person does. But Clara had grown up in a system that swallowed black children whole and never spit them out. She'd seen it happen to her sister's kids when drugs took their mother. She'd seen the foster homes, the scars. Silence, so she didn't call anyone. She brought the baby inside, warmed a bottle of powdered milk she'd gotten from the church pantry, and gave him the only thing she had, a name, Marcus. It meant warrior. He would need to be one. For 8 years, Clara raised Marcus in the shadows. No birth certificate, no social security number, no school enrollment. She taught him to read at her kitchen table using library books and old magazines. She taught him math with dried beans and a ruler. She taught him to hide when strangers came to the door, to be invisible when the landlord visited, to exist quietly in a world that had no record of his existence. The neighbors thought he was a grandson visiting from out of state. Nobody asked questions. In rural Gresham, Georgia, people knew the difference between curiosity and survival. Money came from food stamps, $243 a month, and whatever Clara could earn cleaning houses for white families who paid her in cash and never asked her last name. She was invisible, and she made sure Marcus was too. Every night she prayed the same prayer: keep him safe, keep him hidden, let me live long enough to see him become a man. But a child cannot stay hidden forever. Late last year, Marcus turned 8, and Clara made a choice that would unravel everything. She enrolled him in the local elementary school, using a falsified birth certificate she'd paid a man $300 to create. It wasn't perfect, but she couldn't keep him in the dark any longer. He was too bright, too hungry for the world. He needed to be seen, and seeing him was what destroyed everything. Because when Marcus's face appeared in a school photo posted online, a facial recognition algorithm in a private investigator's database flagged a match. The boy's bone structure, the slope of his nose, the set of his eyes, they matched exactly the late Alexander Kane, the billionaire tech mogul who had died under mysterious circumstances 4 years earlier. Kane had no known children. His empire, valued at $7.8 billion, had passed to his half-brother, Silas Kane, a man who had built his entire identity on being the sole heir. Silas had spent millions making sure no one ever claimed otherwise. He'd buried paternity suits, silenced former associates, and paid a forensic accountant to erase every trace of a secret romance between Alexander and a young woman named Desiree Thomas. Desiree had vanished 8 years ago, 8 months pregnant, and nobody had connected her disappearance to the Kane family until now. The investigators' report landed on Silas's desk on a Thursday afternoon. 6 pages. DNA probability 99.97%. A living heir. A threat to the fortune he had already spent a third of. Silas read the report twice, then made a single phone call. 10 hours later, a midnight black Maybach pulled onto a dirt road in Gresham, Georgia, and stopped at the rusted gate of a house that didn't exist in any official record. Silas Kane stepped out of the car. His suit cost more than Clara's house. His driver stayed behind the wheel. He looked at the small boy in the yard, the boy with his father's jawline and his mother's eyes, and felt nothing but the cold clarity of a businessman closing a deal. He didn't knock on the gate. He didn't call out a greeting. He simply stood there, waiting for Clara to notice him, one hand resting inside his coat pocket, where a checkbook and a loaded pistol sat side by side. And he hadn't decided which one he was going to use. Silas Kane did not rush. He stood at the gate for a full minute, letting Clara see him, letting her fear settle in. The boy was in the yard, barefoot, holding a stick he'd been using to draw shapes in the dirt. When Marcus looked up, Silas smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the other side to realize it. "You must be Marcus," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind. "You look just like your father." Clara's hand shot out and pulled Marcus behind her before the words had even finished leaving Silas's mouth. She'd spent 8 years preparing for a moment like this, not this exact moment, but something like it. A stranger at the gate who knew too much. She'd imagined it would be social services, or the police, or someone from the school who'd noticed the gaps in the paperwork. She'd never imagined it would be a billionaire in a $6,000 suit standing next to a car that cost more than every house on her street combined. "You're at the wrong house." Clara's voice was steady, but her heart was not. "There's no one here by that name." Silas tilted his head slightly, like a man examining a puzzle. "Let's not waste each other's time, Mrs. Johnson." Clara Mee Johnson, born August 5, 1953. Mother of one daughter, Desiree Alois Thomas, born March 12, 1988, disappeared February 20, 2015. The same day a newborn infant was left on your doorstep. A baby boy, no birth certificate, no name, no record of existence until 3 months ago when you enrolled him at Gresham Elementary using a forgery that cost you $300 and will cost you 10 years in federal prison if I decide to make a single phone call. Clara felt the world tilt. He knew everything. He knew the forgery. He knew Desiree's disappearance date. He knew the exact amount she'd paid for the birth certificate. This wasn't a guess. This was a man who had paid people to excavate her entire life and dump the findings at her feet. "What do you want?" Silas reached into his coat pocket. Clara braced herself for the gun. Instead, he pulled out a checkbook. "I want to solve a problem that you didn't know you had. That boy behind you, the boy you've been calling Marcus, his real name is Marcus Alexander Kane. He is the biological son of my late brother, Alexander Kane, which means he is the legal heir to an estate currently valued at $7.8 billion, an estate that I have managed for the past 4 years, an estate that I am not prepared to surrender." Clara's hand tightened around Marcus's arm. The boy was trembling. He didn't understand the words, but he understood danger the way prey animals do. "He's not going anywhere with you." "Of course not. That would be kidnapping. I'm not a criminal." Silas opened the checkbook, uncapped a pen. "I'm a reasonable man offering a reasonable solution. You sign over guardianship voluntarily. You accept a settlement of $2 million, tax-free, delivered within 48 hours. You sign an NDA agreeing never to speak of this again. You live out your remaining years in comfort, and the boy, well, the boy will be placed with a family, a proper family, one that can provide for him, educate him, give him the life his blood entitles him to. You'll never see him again, but you'll be rich. A fair trade, don't you think?" Clara stared at the checkbook. $2 million. For her, it might as well have been $200 billion. It was more money than she'd ever seen, more than she'd earned in 6 decades of working, more than her mother and grandmother had earned combined across centuries of picking cotton and scrubbing floors and cleaning other people's houses. And for a moment, just a fraction of a moment, she felt the seduction of it. Not for herself, for Marcus. What kind of life could $2 million buy him? Schools, doctors, a future. Then she looked at Silas's eyes and she saw what was really there. Generosity, not compassion, cold calculation. The check was a tool, the boy was an obstacle, and she was an inconvenience to be removed as efficiently and quietly as possible. "You said my daughter disappeared." Clara's voice dropped into something low and dangerous. "You said she vanished the same day she left Marcus on my doorstep. What happened to my daughter, Mr. Kane?" Silas's smile flickered. A tiny muscle in his jaw tightened. It was the only crack in his armor, and Clara saw it. "Your daughter made poor choices. She became involved with my brother. She became pregnant. She attempted to extort the family for money. When the family refused, she abandoned the child and fled. Her current whereabouts are unknown." "Liar." Clara said the word like a hammer. "My Desiree didn't extort anyone. She was terrified. She called me 2 weeks before Marcus was born, crying, saying she'd gotten mixed up with powerful people, dangerous people, people who'd threatened to kill her if she didn't disappear. She said she was bringing the baby to me because I was the only person in the world she trusted to keep him safe. She said once he was hidden, she was going to find proof of who she really was and what they'd done to her. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. So you tell me, Mr. Kane, you tell me what your family did to my child." The air went still. Silas closed the checkbook and returned it to his pocket. When he spoke again, the mask was gone. Underneath it was something reptilian, something that had never learned how to be human. She made the same mistake you're making right now. She thought she could fight people who are more powerful than she could ever imagine. She was wrong. You have 48 hours to sign the papers I'll have delivered to this house. If you refuse, I will report the forged birth certificate to federal authorities. I will have the boy removed from your custody by nightfall. I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison for child endangerment, fraud, and kidnapping. And the boy, your precious Marcus, will disappear into a system that has already been paid to lose him. No one will ever hear his name again. Am I being clear? Clara said nothing. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. Silas turned and walked back to the Maybach. He didn't look back. The car pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust that settled slowly on the rusted gate and the patch of dead grass where Marcus had been drawing shapes in the dirt. The boy looked up at Clara. His eyes were wet. Grandma, who was that man? Clara knelt down and pulled him close. She held him the way she'd held him 8 years ago when he was just hours old, wrapped in a soiled towel, crying a question nobody had answered. That was nobody, baby, nobody at all. But her mind was already racing. 48 hours, 2 days to save her grandson, 2 days to find proof of what the Kane family had done to her daughter, 2 days to fight a $7.8 billion empire with nothing but a food stamp card, a fake birth certificate, and the truth. She didn't have a lawyer, she didn't have money, she didn't have allies, but she had one thing Silas Kane didn't know about. Before Desiree vanished, she had mailed Clara a package. A small package with a note that said only, "If something happens to me, open this, it will protect him." Clara had hidden it beneath the floorboards of her bedroom for 8 years, too afraid to look inside. Tonight she would open it, but before she could, someone else was already on their way to her house. Someone who had been watching Silas for a very long time, not a friend, not an enemy, something in between. And what they knew would change everything. Clara didn't open the package right away. She had to get Marcus inside first, had to lock every door and window, had to push the old dresser against the back door because the lock had been broken since the Carter administration. She'd spent her whole life making things work with what she had. Tonight, what she had was a rusted shotgun with no shells, a lock that didn't turn, and a cardboard box that had been waiting under her floorboards for 8 years. She put Marcus to bed in the back room, the one with no windows. She told him she loved him. She told him he was safe. She didn't tell him that every word she'd just spoken might be a lie. Then she knelt beside her bed, pried up the loose floorboard with a butter knife, and pulled out the package. It was smaller than she remembered. A shoebox wrapped in brown paper, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed and cracked. The note was still attached, written in Desiree's hurried hand. "If something happens to me, open this, it will protect him." Clara's fingers trembled as she peeled away the tape. Inside, there was no money, no documents, just a burner phone, a USB drive, and a single photograph. The photograph was of Desiree pregnant, standing next to a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Alexander Kane. On the back, in Desiree's handwriting, were 4 words. "He knew he loved us." Clara stared at the photograph and felt grief and fury twist together inside her chest. Her daughter had not been a scandal, she had been loved, and someone had erased that love. She plugged the USB drive into the ancient laptop she'd salvaged from a church donation bin 2 years ago. It took nearly a minute to load. When it did, a single file appeared, an audio recording, duration 47 minutes. She pressed play. The first voice was Desiree, tired, scared. Speaking into a hidden recorder. "My name is Desiree Thomas. I am 27 years old. I am 8 months pregnant with Alexander Kane's son, and I am recording this because I believe that Silas Kane is going to kill me." Clara pressed her hand against her mouth. The recording continued. Desiree detailed everything, how she'd met Alexander at a charity gala where she was working as a server, how they'd fallen in love, how he'd promised to leave his wife, to acknowledge the child, to rewrite his will, how Silas had found out and confronted Alexander in his study at the family estate. Desiree had been in the next room. She'd heard everything. Then the recording shifted. Background noise, a door opening, Silas's voice, cold and clipped. "You're making a terrible mistake, Alex. That woman is a gold digger. That child is a liability. You sign the papers I've prepared, you renounce paternity, you give her a settlement and send her away, or I will handle it myself." Alexander's voice was firmer than Clara expected. "I'm not abandoning my son. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The Newell names Marcus as my sole heir, not you, never you. You've been stealing from this company for years. I have proof, and if anything happens to me or to Desiree, that proof goes public." There was a long pause, then Silas laughed. Not a human laugh, something hollow and metallic. You think I didn't know about your little insurance policy? I've already taken care of your lawyer. He had an unfortunate accident this morning. And as for your proof, it's gone, deleted, erased. You have nothing, you are nothing. And by this time tomorrow, so will she be. Then came a crash, a scuffle, Desiree gasping, covering her mouth, trying not to scream, and a single gunshot, then silence. Then Silas's voice, calm as a man ordering coffee. Clean this up, make it look like an accident, and find the woman. She's carrying a problem that needs to be solved before it takes its first breath. The recording ended. Clara sat in the dark, her face wet with tears. She hadn't noticed she was crying. Alexander Kane had been murdered. Her daughter had run, had given birth, had left her baby on her mother's doorstep and disappeared into a world that was hunting her. And Clara had spent 8 years unknowingly hiding the only living evidence of a crime that could bring down a $7.8 billion empire. She knew now why Silas wanted Marcus gone. It wasn't about money, it was about survival. The boy's existence was proof. His DNA would confirm that Alexander had fathered a child. The old will, if Desiree had hidden a copy somewhere, would surface eventually. And Silas would spend the rest of his life in prison if either of those things came to light. Clara picked up the burner phone. It still had a charge. One number was saved in the contacts. No name, just a single letter, and she was about to dial when headlights swept across the front window. She froze. The Maybach already, but the engine sounded different, smaller, an ordinary car. She crept to the window and saw a woman stepping out of a dusty Honda Accord. Mid-30s, dark skin, sharp features, wearing a trench coat that had seen better decades. The woman looked at Clara's door, then turned and scanned the road behind her as if checking for a tail. Then she walked up the steps and knocked, 3 times, slow, deliberate, a code. Clara opened the door a crack. The woman spoke quickly, quietly. "My name is Naomi Cole. I was Alexander Kane's chief of staff and the person who helped your daughter escape the night Alexander was murdered. I've been watching Silas for 8 years, waiting for him to make a move on the boy. He made that move tonight." "We don't have much time." Clara let her in. Naomi's eyes were exhausted but sharp, the eyes of a woman who had been running so long she'd forgotten what standing still felt like. She explained everything in a rapid, precise stream. She had been Alexander's closest confidant. She knew about the affair, knew about the will, knew that Silas was embezzling from the company. The night Alexander died, Naomi was the one who called Desiree and told her to run. She'd driven Desiree to a safe house, delivered the burner phone and the USB drive, and helped her record the confession. Then Desiree had vanished on her own terms, refusing to put Naomi at further risk. She'd left only one instruction: if Silas ever finds my son, burn him down. "Where is my daughter now?" Clara asked. Naomi's face was the answer. It wasn't an answer Clara wanted. "Silas found her 6 years ago. It was quick. She didn't suffer. I'm sorry." Clara closed her eyes. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on her ribs, but she didn't break. She couldn't, not yet. There was still a boy sleeping in the back room who needed her to be strong for a few more hours. Naomi opened her laptop. "I've been inside Silas's private servers for 3 years. I have everything. Embezzlement records, the falsified accident report on Alexander's death, and an email chain that proves Silas ordered the hit on Desiree. But I don't have the will." Alexander's original will, the one naming your grandson as heir, is in a safety deposit box at a bank in Atlanta. Only 2 people can access it: you as the guardian of the heir and a judge willing to issue an order. Silas knows this. He's been monitoring the bank for years. The moment you step inside, he'll know. "So we go to the police first," Clara said. "Take them the evidence." Naomi shook her head. "Silas owns the police in 4 counties. He's donated to every sheriff's campaign, every prosecutor's re-election fund. If you walk into a station, you'll be arrested for the forged birth certificate before you finish your first sentence, and your grandson will be taken into custody by a system that Silas has already paid to make him disappear forever." Clara felt the walls closing in. "Then what do? We wake up the boy. We get in my car. We drive to Atlanta tonight, and we force that bank open the moment it unlocks. Then we call every news station in Georgia, and we tell them the story before Silas can bury it. It's the only move he won't see coming. He thinks you're a poor grandmother who'll fold under pressure. He doesn't know about the recording. He doesn't know about me. And he doesn't know that you've spent 8 years surviving on nothing but faith and stubbornness. That's a better weapon than anything he's got." Clara looked toward the back room where Marcus slept. 8 years of hiding, 8 years of fear, 8 years of loving a child the world said shouldn't exist. She nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." She woke Marcus gently, She told him they were going on an adventure. She didn't tell him it was an adventure that might end with all of them in prison or worse. She grabbed the USB drive, the photograph, the gun with no shells, and the prayer her mother had taught her when she was a girl. Or if you're listening, I know I haven't asked for much, but I'm asking now, protect this child, protect us, and if it's not too much trouble, let me live long enough to see that man's face when he realizes he lost. She was halfway to the front door when a new set of headlights cut through the darkness. These were different, brighter, bluer, accompanied by the low rumble of a diesel engine, not a Maybach, a county sheriff's SUV, and behind it, a black sedan with government plates. Naomi looked out the window and her face went pale. He didn't wait. He called it in. Child Protective Services and the Sheriff's Department. They're here to take Marcus. The headlights flooded the front yard. A car door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out, one hand resting casually on his holster. He looked at Clara's house, the way a man looks at a problem he's already been paid to solve. Clara grabbed Marcus's hand. He was trembling, still half asleep, clutching the stick he'd been drawing with earlier like it was the only thing he owned. In a way, it was. Naomi looked at Clara. Back door now, I'll stall them. Clara shook her head. They'll arrest you. They'll try. Naomi reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather case. She opened it, a badge. I'm not just a former chief of staff. I'm a federal agent, 3 years deep undercover. And I've been waiting a very long time to tell Silas Kane exactly who I am. Before Clara could respond, the officer knocked on the front door. Hard 3 times, no code, just authority. Mrs. Johnson, this is the Gresham County Sheriff's Department. Open the door. We have a court order for the removal of a minor child. Clara looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at the back door. Marcus looked up at both of them with eyes that had seen too much and understood nothing and everything all at once. The officer knocked again, louder. Mrs. Johnson, I'm not going to ask again. Clara tightened her grip on Marcus's hand. She had no shells in the shotgun, no money in her pocket, no lawyer on speed dial, but she'd survived 69 years on nothing but nerve and prayer and a stubborn refusal to let the world tell her who she was. She kissed Marcus on the forehead. Stay close to me, baby. We're not going anywhere with them. Not tonight, not ever. The officer stepped through the doorway, one hand on his holster, the other holding a folded court order like a winning lottery ticket. He was a large man, the kind who'd learned early that size could substitute for intelligence and never bothered to develop anything else. Mrs. Johnson, I have a court order to remove the minor child Marcus Thomas from your custody on grounds of fraud, endangerment, and illegal concealment. Hand him over now, and nobody gets hurt. Clara pulled Marcus closer. You're not taking my grandson anywhere. Deputy Reed sighed the sigh of a man who had done this 100 times and would do it 100 more. Ma'am, I don't want to use force, but I will. The CPS workers are right outside. The boy is going into state custody tonight, and you are going to county lockup unless you step aside. Naomi Cole stepped forward, positioning herself between Clara and the deputy. The movement was calm, deliberate, practiced. Deputy Reed, I'm going to ask you to holster your weapon and listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. Reed squinted at her. And who exactly are you? Naomi reached into her coat and pulled out her badge. The leather case fell open to reveal a gold shield and an identification card. Special Agent Naomi Cole, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Deep Crimes Division. I've been undercover for 3 years investigating Silas Kane for embezzlement, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. The child you're attempting to seize is a material witness and the legal heir to the Kane estate. The court order you're holding was obtained through falsified evidence provided by a suspect in an active federal investigation. If you execute that order tonight, you will be complicit in obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Are you prepared to wear those cuffs yourself, Deputy? The deputy's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that looked like fear. He glanced back at the CPS workers who had stopped at the threshold. You expect me to believe that? Naomi held up her phone. I expect you to call your supervisor and verify the credentials I'm about to text him, or you can wait 5 minutes. My backup is already en route. Your choice. Reed's radio crackled. A voice on the other end, his dispatcher, sounding urgent. Unit 7, we've got a situation. FBI just called the station. All operations involving a Johnson residence in Gresham are to cease immediately. Repeat, cease immediately. Do not, I say again, do not execute the removal order. A federal agent is on site. Acknowledge. Reed stared at the radio, then at Naomi, then at Clara, who hadn't moved an inch. He holstered his weapon with the slow deliberation of a man realizing he had just made the worst mistake of his career and was trying to figure out how to walk it back. "Acknowledged," he muttered into the radio. Standing down, the CPS workers exchanged glances and retreated to their sedan without a word. Deputy Reed backed out of the doorway, his authority suddenly a costume he no longer fit inside. By the time the first FBI vehicle arrived 10 minutes later, he was sitting in his cruiser with the door closed, filling out paperwork he hoped would keep him out of prison. The next 72 hours moved with the velocity of a freight train and the precision of a scalpel. Naomi's team arrested Silas Kane at his Atlanta penthouse at 6 o'clock the following morning. He was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of scotch he'd been drinking since midnight, which was when he'd learned that his coup had failed. The arrest warrant listed 14 counts, including first-degree murder for the death of Alexander Kane, conspiracy to commit murder for the death of Desiree Thomas, embezzlement of corporate funds totaling over $900 million, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and fraud. The evidence Naomi had gathered over 3 years was so comprehensive that Silas's own lawyer took one look at it and advised him to plead guilty. By noon, Clara, Marcus, and Naomi stood in the vault room of First Atlanta Trust and Savings, watching a bank officer open safety deposit box number 2774. Inside was a single document, Alexander Kane's last will and testament, dated 30 days before his death, witnessed by a notary whose records had been mysteriously deleted from state archives. The will was 14 pages long. It named Marcus Alexander Kane as sole heir to the Kane fortune, a trust valued at $7.8 billion. But it also contained a clause that nobody expected. "If my son is orphaned, custody shall be granted without contest to the guardian who raised him, Clara Mee Johnson, whom I have never met but whose courage I have known through the testimony of her daughter. In recognition of her sacrifice, a separate trust in the amount of $20 million shall be established for her care and the care of her household, to be administered by a fiduciary of her choosing. This is not a gift, it is a debt." Clara read those words 12 times before she believed them. Alexander had never met her, but Desiree had told him everything. He had prepared for the worst, and in doing so, he had given Clara the weapon she needed to win. The press conference 4 days later was carried live on every major network. Clara stood at a podium in downtown Atlanta, flanked by Naomi and a small boy who looked out at the cameras with the same curious eyes that had once stared up at her from a cardboard box on a February morning. She told the truth about everything: the doorstep, the hiding, the forgery, the visit from Silas, the murder of her daughter. Her voice shook but never broke. When she finished, a reporter asked, "What happens now?" Clara looked down at Marcus. "Now we go home, we plant a garden. We get him a birth certificate with his real name on it, and we never hide again." The final legal ruling came 6 weeks later. Silas Kane pleaded guilty to all counts and received life without parole. The stolen funds were recovered in full plus interest. The Kane estate was transferred to a trust managed by a court-appointed fiduciary until Marcus turned 25. Clara's guardianship was recognized by the state of Georgia with retroactive legal effect, wiping away any trace of the forged birth certificate as if it had never existed. She used a portion of her trust to buy the house she'd been renting for 30 years. She replaced the lock on the back door. She planted tomatoes in the yard where Marcus had drawn shapes in the dirt. And every night before bed, she sat with him and told him stories about his mother, how she'd been brave, how she'd been smart, how she'd loved him enough to give him away so he could live. But here's the thing nobody expected. When the story broke, it did more than free one family. It sparked a nationwide investigation into the use of falsified CPS reports by wealthy individuals attempting to manipulate custody cases. 3 state senators resigned. 2 family court judges were indicted. The Gresham County Child Welfare Office underwent a complete restructuring, and the boy who had been born with no name, raised in hiding, and hunted by a billionaire became something he'd never been allowed to be: a child. He went to school, he made friends, he drew pictures not of escape routes, but of spaceships and dinosaurs, and a grandmother whose hands were still calloused from scrubbing floors. Clara never forgot what she'd survived. But she also never let it define her. Her mother's prayer, the one she'd whispered in the dark while Silas Kane plotted her destruction, had been answered. not by a miracle, by a daughter's courage, a stranger's sacrifice, and a grandmother's refusal to let go. Clara's story is extraordinary, but her circumstances are not. Across America right now, more than 2.5 million grandparents are raising their grandchildren. Many of them live at or below the poverty line. Many of them are doing it in the shadows, without legal recognition, without support, without anyone knowing their names. They are the invisible safety net that catches children when everything else has failed. And they do it not because they have the resources, but because they have the love. What happened to Clara almost happened to thousands of families every year. Children removed from loving homes because of technicalities, paperwork, or the predatory actions of people with more power and darker intentions. The difference between Clara and the grandmothers you never hear about is that she had a daughter brave enough to leave behind a weapon and a stranger who'd spent years waiting to become an ally. Not everyone gets that, but everyone deserves a system that doesn't automatically side with the powerful. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Not who won this story, that's clear. The question is, who in your community is fighting a battle you can't see? Which grandparent, aunt, uncle, neighbor is quietly holding a family together without resources, without recognition, without a safety net? And what would happen if one person with access, with knowledge, with power, decided to show up for them the way Naomi showed up for Clara? If this story moved you, share it. Not for the views, for the conversation. Because the more we talk about the invisible heroes among us, the harder it becomes to look the other way. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story about resilience, justice, and the people who refuse to be erased. Until next time, stay watchful, stay compassionate, and remember, the most powerful person in a crisis is often the one nobody thought to notice.